Private sector means privately owned. We call ourselves privateers, entrepreneurs. The public sector is government run, government funded, government operated, government controlled. There are lots of sport businesses that are both public and private. Far more of them are private, but there is a large number of sport businesses that are of the public nature. Public sport businesses would include public universities, like Clemson University or Ohio State University, or even smaller schools, Dayton University or Cincinnati, or even smaller down. All the athletics departments and all the recreation departments and all those things that they do inside of those athletic departments are owned and operated by the state government, local governments, the recreation departments, recreation districts, all the skate parks and public golf courses and public tennis parks, the public marinas, all those public facilities, even some public tourism things. Outdoor leisure and recreation kind of stuff, the canoeing and the camping and the kayaking and all that stuff is run through public agencies. Government funded, government controlled, county, state, or federal. The private sector is everything else, all your manufacturing, Nike, Adidas, Reebok, all your private informations, ESPN, any specific magazine that you get, Golf Digest, Bowling Digest, whatever digest, all of those are privately held, privately owned. To the YMCA's are private. All your private health clubs and training facilities and all those businesses that operate in the sport profession. There is sometimes crossover between the two, and we'll actually look at some of the crossover today. I want to talk a little bit about the financing, and in the financing you get some of the crossover in regards to that. We own this stuff. We own it. Anything that's in the private sector is owned by people. In the public sector is owned by no one. It's government controlled. So the government doesn't necessarily own, but they control. So the government doesn't own anything, but it does have the rights to the stuff. So when you go into a recreation department, it's run by the city government, it's operated, afforded, and funded by, and you could say that it is largely owned by them, but nobody owns a government. So in that regards, even though a government may have assets, you know, who is the government and who owns that is not that easily explainable. So these are operated and controlled and funded and serviced by government agencies and government people. And so we work here, we work for rec departments, we work for all these athletic departments. We just don't own this stuff. And over here we work in it, and on occasion, if you're fortunate enough, you get to own it as well. And so for those of you that might have the fortunate opportunity to advance into ownership, and that's not automatic. Most people that work in the sport profession do not own their stuff. Most of our jobs, we work for them. But for those of you that aspire, if you have aspirations to one day, not initially, but one day, become an owner-operator, owner-operators spend most of their time in finance, business advancement, business development, and all those aspects. As an owner-operator of my own businesses, or what are known as shares of businesses, I spend more time just working on the financial operations or the branding than I do anything else. And so for those of you that aspire to have ownership, you'll be involved in branding, selling, planning, and financing. How can I bring more money in, save more money? That's what we do as business owners. Unless you're a sole proprietor and you're a one-person business and you do it all, or you sometimes work for yourself, and there's only a handful of you and you do it all. most owner-operators, most of the owners are involved in what's known as higher critical thinking or higher levels of thinking. So the owners of NFL franchises, they're involved in higher level critical thinking of the branding and the selling and the planning and the financing of that business itself. You don't find many people in ownership that don't traverse in these areas. And so just so you know, owning a business largely requires you to be a higher level thinker, a higher systems thinker. You need to be more of a critical thought person, and more of a financial numbers person. Most of us are able to absorb the information, the numbers and processes and deal with it. And so if that's not to your liking, then you're probably not gravitating toward ownership, which is not a bad thing, because we all start out working. We must all go to work in the sport profession, and we all go to work in the industry. So whether you land a job on the private side or land a job on the public side, it doesn't matter. You're gonna learn from those environments, you'll learn from those experiences. And those are all good jobs. We have lots of students that graduate that go into the public side and or the private side, and they work their way up, and they go to different organizations and they work their way up. And there's a wonderful upward mobility and transcendence as you go into these different industries. One of the big differences is on the financial side of public and private. And where they get their money, how they're required to manage it, and what they do with it. Public businesses get their money from the people, the public. So rec departments and public institutions, lots of others, they're given tax dollars. So the city or the county or the state or the federal government budgets for a certain amount of money to be given to rec departments and athletic departments and institutions, marinas, public golf courses, public swimming pools. Where does that money come from? Tax dollars, people. So as we pay taxes publicly, those taxes go into a much larger budget, which are then allocated to the hundreds of different departments, which includes the public recreation, the public leisure, the public sport environment. So what are these taxes? Sales tax, property tax. There's things called restaurant taxes. Can't spell it anymore. There's sin taxes, alcohol, tobacco, firearms. There's, they have special taxes. So when those are collected at the local level or at the state level, a percentage of those are given to and directed at these public institutions. So locally, you pay sales tax on things you buy. Property owners pay property tax. You pay tax on the vehicles every time you get a new sticker in the mail or a new license plate. You gotta pay the taxes on your property. And those dollars are then allocated to be used by all the different departments that the government runs, of which one owns the sporting division. There's always a steady flow of allocation to these businesses through taxation. The truth is, when the budget's hurting, the government officials know they can always tax you a little more. So anytime they try to raise the sales tax, anytime they try to raise the property tax, anytime they try to raise the restaurant tax or the sin-based tax or there's lots of taxes. They're small percentages. And even they're trying to raise them quarter point or half point or an eighth of point. No matter what the amount is, anytime they're trying to raise taxes, they're either trying to fund a new project or fund the current projects. So, as these businesses require more assets, they basically ask the public for more money. Now, the government officials can apply for tax increases, but on most occasions, the public has to approve it. There are some instances where they can just pass it right through without public approval. But not all cases. There are some cases where they can get it done without our involvement. But actually, in most cases, property taxes, sales taxes, a handful of other things, either go through the public approval or they go through your state legislature. This goes, I wouldn't call it politics, but I'd call it government. So involving your state legislatures, we have, here in South Carolina, we have a state house, and there is a series of state representatives that are elected. And in this area, it's Coburn, and it's Burns, and there's several others. Josh, I can't think of his last name. Several of them that go to the State House from the area, and they represent us. And so the State House approves budgets. The State House passes legislation that affects us to live within the state. Yes, Josh?
Isn't Taylor one of them, or what?
Who? Taylor? I don't know that name. I know Coburn and Burns, they are involved in North Greenville, so. Anyways, the State House manages the legislation, the taxation, the budgeting within the state of South Carolina, which directly affects us. And then you have local officials, you have county officials. Steve Shaw represents District 6, that comes out of in this area, Travelers Rest area, and he was just elected to the county council. And so the county legislates taxes and the budget and things like that, and they take care of some of the county needs, which is your rec departments and your golf courses and your swimming holes. And so when they want to build a new public golf course, or they want to upgrade the swimming hole, or they want to add on to the public tennis facility, the local officials that run that, the rec department, have to submit proposals to the county. The county either approves it or not, and then they have to figure out where they're going to get the money from. In most instances, when they're expanding sport facilities or anything, when they're adding on police stations or fire departments, any public service, the waterworks, that money generally comes from either the sale of bonds, which is an investment vehicle they do, or through the people, the populace, by raising taxes to us. So just recognize that when things are going on in the public arena, somebody has to pay for it, and those somebodies are generally always going to be us and us. Now, whether you see that and feel that on the front end, or you see that and feel that in the back end, the truth is, in either regards, you're going to see it and feel it. It might be kicked down the road, as known as deferred taxation, deferred payment, where sometimes they'll approve it today and it doesn't go into effect 12 months from now, or 18 months from now, or 24 months from now, or it goes into effect today, those kind of things. Over here, doesn't work quite the same. When a YMCA wants to expand, when Upward Sports wants to expand, when a private golf course, what's a private golf course around here, Miller? Private one?
Thornblade.
Thornblade. Wants to expand. When Top Golf wants to come to the community. When the Hit House wants to expand or add a second location. When a local gym, like Gold's Gym, wants to expand or add a second facility, or add more equipment, or do anything, add more personnel. Let's say they want to hire any one of you. They have to figure out how to fund it. The organization that we own or that we work for has to figure out how to fund a new location, new equipment, added personnel. When there's COVID and you got to do all this additional cleaning, we've got to add to the cleaning budget, add cleaning personnel, when we add new sports and new events and new attractions, when something breaks and it's not in the budget and we gotta fix it, when all of those things happen, in the private sector, we, the business entrepreneurs, have to figure out how to fund that. So here's how we do that. We either do it through our operational budget, or we capitalize it by going out and either borrowing money, or we take it out of our reserves, or we raise it privately. Now let me start with the first one. When we want to do something on the private side, the hope is you've planned ahead of time. That's not always the case. But if you're a good strategic foresight and forethinker, and you look at 6 months and 1 year and 18 months and 24 months and 3 years, if you're always looking down the road, then good financial planners are going to build into their budget. They're going to build into their budget, into their operating expenses, expansion, new equipment, new personnel, new provisions. We have reserves that we keep on hand, short-term reserves, and we have reserves that we keep in what you'd call savings, or really more investment, long-term reserves. And so when we want to do new things on the private side, we have to fund it out of the budget. Well, if your budget has excess monies right now, it's called surplus. If you've got it, then you can do things. If my business is sitting on an extra $30,000, then I can go buy some new exercise equipment. I can change out some broken ones. I can get some new plates and weights. I can add more cleaning equipment. I can hire some part-time cleaning staff or more. If you have surplus excess right now in the operating budget, that makes it fairly simple. But let's remember that there's always, this goes back to weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, there's always a scarcity of resources. And that means we don't always have excess monies. We're not always flowing in dough. If I check most of your personal accounts, you're probably not flowing in it. Some of you might be well off. Some of you maybe have 2 or 3 jobs right now. I would assume most of you aren't flowing in it. Well, the truth is most businesses aren't flush with cash, particularly surplus. They may have cash, but it's already allocated. So there's scarcity in the marketplace. If you've planned and you are reserving resources on a regular basis, then when the anomalies rise up, the difficulties, something breaks, you need to fix it, it's expensive, insurance doesn't cover it, the COVID, any more cleaning, need supplies, got to do things, business is down. Your operating budget can handle it because you plan for it. Now that's good financial planning, good strategic planning. That means you're having the foresight to recognize that when money comes in every month, I stick a little bit back in a reserve account for short term, I stick a little bit back in reserve account for long term. On the personal side, you'd call that savings on the short term and investing on the long term. Every time I get paid, I put some amount of money in savings, that's the short term, and I put some amount of money in my investment accounts, that's long term. So I am managing the Briggs household by taking monies off of the operational budget and putting in the same things. That's what we do on the business side. We take monies that come in, we pay our bills, we pay our taxes, and we take care of all the operations. And when there is excess and surplus, I put a little in the short-term savings, a little in long-term investment, and that assures that we're going to be ready for short-term difficulty and we're planning for long-term issues. But always recognizing that there's a scarcity. Now this month you may not have surplus, next month you may. And so this month you may run a deficit. You got to pull out of those reserves. Hopefully not too often, but as long as in a 12-month period you're cash flow positive and your P&L is profitable, and then you're putting in more in savings and more in reserves than you're pulling out, that's a good thing. We recognize there's scarcity, there's difficulty in the marketplace, and we can't always afford it. The second way, if I'm not able to do these things that I want to do out of the operational budget, then I have to figure out a way to capitalize it. Now that's a great word. Probably one you're going to get tested on. Of course, so is scarcity and operational budget. I assume you've had some of those already, but to capitalize something means I go and I get the money that is outside of my operating budget. I have a significant amount of cash and I'm ready to buy something. I have figured out where and how to go find the resources in order to do the things that I need to do, and that is a capitalization process. So if I want to add a second location, expand the hit house, buy $30,000 worth of equipment, when Topgolf comes into town and they're going to do a major project, all of those have to be capitalized. To capitalize, it means I've assessed how much money I need. I've done a budget, I've done some planning. For a new business like Topgolf, I've written a business plan, I have a business proposal, it's been accepted, and the organization's moving forward on it. Either the organization sets money aside or they go get it. Thornblade, when they want to do work on the golf course, they either take it out of their operational budget or they do what's called an assessment. They assess all their members. It's the same thing that Augusta National does. When they want to make changes, they just send out an assessment. Every member sends in a check for $20,000. They have the money, it's capitalized, and they go do it. And people live in Thornblade or people that are members of Augusta National can afford to do that. We don't always have that luxury. So, here's how we capitalize. There's three ways to do it. We borrow it, take it out of our long-term reserves, or we go raise it right now. Now, the first one, the borrowing method, is where you go use commercial lenders, or sometimes you float bonds, general obligation bonds, or other kinds of bonds. If you're reading the next chapter or two in the book, there's a lot of detail about bonds. I'm not going to get into the weeds about bonds because it's a micro element and a macro principle here. I want to stay involved in the macro principle so you get the greater picture and not get stuck in the weeds. We have to borrow from commercial banks, and commercial banks are friends. If you're doing good banking, your business is banking with SunTrust and your business is banking with some of the other banks in the community, some of the credit unions, some of the national banks, Bank of America, some of those you've got good credit, you've got good accounts, you've got a credit history and account history and what's called transactional history. You're putting in, you're taking out, you're putting in, you're taking out, and you have good standing with the commercial banks. Then the commercial banks can be a friend of yours in the borrowing process. And so it simply looks like this. It's really quite the same as it is for us individually. If you have good standing and good credit and good resources, the banks are willing to loan you money if it looks like you're able to pay it back. Because the banks are always in business of making money, and lots of money, and who do they make money off of and who do they make money from? They make money off of you and from you. So you keep the banks in business, if you didn't realize that. The businesses in the business market keep the banks in business. Even the governments, because the governments park money, and the governments have to transact, so all of these public sport businesses and everything else have accounts in the commercial banks. But their job, their industry, is to make money off you. And not just transactional monies, they make a lot of money when they loan money. So banks are always eager to loan money. Now that should perk your interest. It also cause some significant flags to go up. The truth is, in the Bible, here's our faith integration. In the Proverbs, the Lord tells us through Solomon that the borrower is enslaved to the lender. So any of you that have borrowed money and are indebted to some individual or organization on this earth, in the supernatural, the Lord would say that's a form of enslavement or slavery. His goal is to help you get out of that. So we're all slaves. Now, it's just hypothetical principle, biblical principle. But you're obligated to pay back plus interest, and sometimes fees, late fees. There's origination fees, there's front-end fees and back-end fees, there's processing fees, and there's all kinds of things. When you borrow money, you begin to give ownership control over to banking individuals. They have an ability to look into your financials to make sure you're doing well because they have a vested interest if they loan you a lot of money. If they loan you a little bit and you're able to pay that back and pay it back quickly and swiftly and easily, well, then you can learn to use the banking system as leverage. You can actually leverage them as an asset. A willing partner to work with you. So if you need to buy equipment for Gold's Gym and you have a willing partner and it's a bank and they trust you and they've loaned you and you've paid them back, then you go to them, you float a line of credit, you get a second mortgage, you borrow $40,000, you buy the equipment, you pay them back over the next 12 to 18 months, everybody's happy. They make their interest on you, which is their profit margin. Banks normally charge anywhere from, right now, let me see, mortgage refinance rates are down as low as 2.5, 2.6. Commercial real estate loans are down in the low sixes, and personal secured and unsecured loans could be as under 10%. So those aren't bad. I would tell you that we're historically probably the lowest rates that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And that's good from a borrowing side, because the borrowers are paying less back to the commercial banks. They don't make as much, so they're more willing, more inclined, they're more interested to loan you individually money, to loan you businesses money. They have to make loans to make money, and banks are very good at making lots of money. And it's called fractional reserve lending. There's an entire study on that in itself. If you want to learn where money comes from and how banking industry works, fractional reserve lending will take you in the weeds and really teach you a lot about the I don't want to say the schemes, but how the banking industry works and how they survive off of us. And that includes businesses and government as well. You can borrow from banks. Most commercial businesses borrow money at some point in time or another. I looked it up one day with the SBA, Small Business Administration. It's over 80% of all businesses that operate borrow money at one point in time during the course of a business operation. Now, there's probably quite a few small businesses and individual sole proprietorships and individual organizations that don't borrow, but for the most part, we businesses, we individuals, we organizations are going to, at one point in time or another, when you buy land or build a building or go through some reconstructive process or advancement process, will borrow money. But if your financials are in good shape and you have surplus, you're able to repay back. Actually, you're leveraging a good, what's called instrument or tool to be able to advance your business. So in order to capitalize something, you might have to borrow and go through the process. The process of being approved is an arduous process. You fill out lots of papers, you provide lots of financials. If you've ever been approved for a car loan or a credit card, those are fairly easy. To go borrow $500,000 from the bank for equipment to renovate a gymnasium or an old worn down building, to expand into something in any private side, it's obviously a more arduous process, and it doesn't happen quickly. You can get approved for a credit card or a car loan or a boat a little bit quicker, but doing bigger commercial projects, there's a lot more that goes into it. Second way to capitalize is to take money out of your reserves. Now, you have two kinds of reserves. You have short-term reserves, you call that savings, and you have long-term reserves, and that's often your investment money. And so, short-term reserves, we as businesses, we put money in project funds, we put money in reserve funds, we put money in savings funds. And we know that from time to time during the business cycle of a given year, I need to tap into that to do things. We got to replace some carpet in a few rooms. It's going to cost $6,000. We didn't really plan on it, so we take money out of the reserves. I got a water leak in the roof, and I need to have the roofers come, and it's going to cost a couple of grand to do that. So we take money out of reserves. I need to replace a handful of equipment on the football team and the basketball team and the lacrosse team and the archery team. And so I take money out of reserves. So short-term reserves or savings, you can make some of those smaller purchases for those things that you may not have planned for, or those things that you have been setting money aside. The truth is, that's how Dave Ramsey teaches you on the personal side. If you want to buy something a year from now, you start reserving money each month. $20, $50, $100, whatever that is. So by the time you get to that point, 12 months from now, 6 months from now, 18 months from now, you've reserved either all or a significant amount of that money. And you don't have to go and become a borrower and become enslaved to that. So So that same principle applies here in the private sector of the marketplace, where we're always reserving resources in short-term savings accounts, short-term money market accounts, even in our checking accounts, because we're aware that issues and matters and scenarios come up, and I need money for that. Or the last way is to raise it. We often do that in the nonprofit side. We can raise the money. And how do I do that? Well, I have to, it's called development. I have to become a development officer, and I go out and I get scholarship donations, and I get people to do some sponsoring of things. I get people to give donations to a capital campaign or a fundraising campaign. I sell things. I sell t-shirts, and instead of $5 a piece, I have them made and I sell them $50 a piece, knowing that the contribution goes as a donation to the institution. There's lots of fundraising methods. You do it for clubs, you do it for teams, you do it for all kinds of small organizations. Well, we also do it for large organizations. We sell things on a regular basis and overprice them, and we'll call it fundraising. We will do things for naming rights for short-term things. We'll name certain things even on the short term to raise money for certain things, or even on the long term, we'll sell some naming rights and sell some sponsorship opportunities, put names on the back of shirts, for example, to help support the local sports league, because it's sponsored by Short Clips or Shortcuts, whatever the haircut place is, or Great Clips. You may see that as an example. So forms of fundraising or development, which includes sponsorship, it doesn't have to, but those forms of resource acquisition are raising monies. Now, oftentimes in the nonprofit sector, North Greenville University, YMCA's, ministries, Upward Sports, churches, we have to do a lot of fundraising because we're not always readily able to borrow money from banks. And so what happens is the nonprofits such as a YMCA or an Upward Sports or North Greenville University Athletics, for example, we can borrow money from banks. Nonprofits can. But banks recognize that nonprofits are service businesses, and they're not always set out and destined and oriented to make exorbitant amounts of money. Therefore, they don't always have a lot of resources available for down payments, to share the load on a borrow, or to make a repayment. Now, North Greenville can borrow money, it has borrowed money. YMCA's can borrow money, they have Upward Sports. But they tend to be scrutinized a little bit differently than a for-profit, like Topgolf, or Gold's Gym, or even the Hit House. These are just examples. Banks know that businesses that are in the business of making money know how to make money, and often can make money and have excess money, surpluses. So it makes sense that banks are a little more willing to loan to businesses that are in the business of making money, because banks know they're going to get paid back from them, versus businesses that are in the service industry. Remember, I told you nonprofits are service businesses. I told you that no less than 4 or 5 times. So YMCA's, Upward Sports, North Greenville Universities, our service is that we provide high quality education or high quality sporting experience for those that can't always afford. YMCA's have tons of scholarships, lower price ranges. Upward Sports, Sports Ministry offer tremendous service. Lots of nonprofits and foundations are designed to provide a high quality service to people groups at a lower price. And we're not in the business of exorbitant profits to be given off to our ownership. Therefore, we don't always have the flush cash flow to repay exorbitant amount of debt. Let's say another private company like an ESPN or a Nike, a Reebok, Adidas, any of those organizations that are in the business of making money off of you and I and have exorbitant. It's easy for them to borrow money and build a plant in another state, or borrow money and build another location and do those kind of things. It's a little bit harder for nonprofits. Now, we're not eliminated, we're not excluded from it. We can borrow money, it's just a little bit different set of circumstances, a little bit different criteria for nonprofits. And the truth is, like North Greenville, if you have good track record, good financial history, and good financial management, if you are running some form of a surplus and you can show that in the banks and you have a good rapport, it goes back to banking relationships. The banks are more than willing to loan to nonprofits, but they are under different forms of scrutiny and different forms of higher scrutiny. So we have to learn, we have to, on our side, be much better at raising money in the nonprofits than, say, these for-profits. The for-profits, they don't do much fundraising. You don't hear Nike and Reebok and Adidas doing fundraising, or Adidas. But NGU Athletics, the Crusader Club, your teams have your clubs, you gotta do fundraising because that's just part of the deal. So there is an interesting dichotomy there, and it regards resources. And that's why, for those of you that play on sport teams, you gotta do some fundraising every year for your club. Whether we ask your parents to give money to the club, or you go work a number of events somewhere else and the school gets paid for that, or you have to sell something, those basic forms of fundraising are done. The men's football team does a golf tournament every summer, and so we work hard to produce that. That puts a lot of money back in. We have certain things we do for many of the teams to be able to raise additional dollars. We go find individual donors. We donate money to cross country. We donate money strictly to golf and track and field and women's soccer. And we have to go raise money to build all the facilities. We have to go get private giving and private donating to be able to produce these new facilities, because we're not in the business of just going and borrowing money and paying back on a regular basis. Nonprofits, we operate with a different mindset. We have different philosophies, different dogmas, different theologies, and all of that plays in. Big for-profit entities that are for-profit, they don't have nearly the struggle. They don't have to do the fundraising. It's easier for them to capitalize projects, and it's just a different set of parameters. And as long as you recognize that, whichever industry you go work in, whichever arena you go play in, those are the parameters of which you play. Government businesses, public businesses, they don't have any trouble raising money. Unfortunately, the federal government can write checks and charge the card forever because they print money. It's not always healthy, certainly not always ethical, and not always a good practice. But governments tend to be a little more loose when it comes to floating money and doing projects. At the larger level, when you get down to state governments and then down to regional governments, county governments, and city governments, and smaller municipalities, the reins of control, the financial parameters tighten down, the measures of financial control and accountability all tighten down tremendously. And so what we do at the local level for the local recreation department is probably a lot more scrutinized and under a lot more controls than, say, something larger at the federal government level. But the truth is, if they want to expand the rec department or athletics at a significantly large institution, or even a much smaller one, they will sometimes be charged with the responsibility to raise money, but a lot of times they can go back to the taxpayers and the state government or the regional government, and somehow they tend to find money. Now, the problem with that is that it's always on the responsibility, or what you'd call the backs of. I would just say it's simply the responsibility of the populace, the people, to pay those things back. We'd all like new stuff. Somebody's got to pay for it. In the private sector, we figure it out. We figure out. We go fund it ourselves. We figure out how to fund it, and we take care of it, and we pay them back. We love the private sector because we solve problems, we make things happen, we repay debt. We are responsible with our resources. We're good stewards. We're highly accountable with monies. And shareholders on this side of the for-profit ventures, shareholders want to maximize their profits. So they like financial accountability because they want to know that that we're getting the very most bang out of a buck, the organization's making the most, and that there's money left over to be dispensed back to the shareholders in the form of dividends or profit sharing, or the net asset value of the stock goes up. And so my stock share price, my shares go up in price when there's good stewardship. You can check the market any day of the week, pull up a handful of private stocks, and let's see what's going on. You can say, okay, well, today the market opened a little down, but 3 of my funds are up. So obviously there are some indicators there that is identifying that something's going on good because they're up a little bit. It's good. Okay, any questions about that before I move on to the next thing and then we close it down? Okay, put your notes away and pull out that assignment.
Should I stop recording now?
Huh?
Should I stop recording?
Yes, please.